Hey, educators. Welcome back to the Make Math Happen podcast. I'm your host, Laneshia, and today we're diving into one of my favorite topics making student thinking visible using anchor charts. So, if you've been rocking with me since season one, the beginning of this year, 2025, and you remember episode 18, where we talked about how math isn't magic, it's patterns made visible. In that episode, we talked about surface, deep, and transfer learning and how moving through those stages is what allows for real understanding to happen. So, in typical teacher form, I gotta start off with a recall because I need to make sure that we're on the same page before we move forward. Okay, so let's briefly think about what those stages meant before we jump into today's episode. So, first, surface learning. This is the phase where students explore new concepts and make connections to procedural skills and vocabulary that gives shape to developing conceptual understanding. Okay. So those students are exploring, right? They're making sense of, they're really trying to figure things out and how they work. And then with ample practice, we start to then move into that deep learning phase, which is where students make connections about conceptual ideas. Okay, this is where they start to form those generalizations, right? And apply and to practice those procedural skills with fluency. Okay, it's super important that they're able to practice so that they can then be able to transfer, because within this phase, that's when students can independently think through more complex mathematics. And now they can begin to plan, investigate, and elaborate as they apply what they know to new mathematical situations. Okay, so, but here's the challenge though. Here's the thing that I know is taking place. Too many students never actually transition from one stage of learning to the next. They linger in surface learning. Okay. They're exploring, they're collecting all of these strategies. Maybe even they're getting comfortable with some of the vocabulary, if we're using accurate vocabulary, that is, and some of those models, right? But when it's time to transfer that, when it's time to start generalizing that understanding to now more complex situations, they're not able to move forward. They're stuck. Okay. I want you to think back to a time where you taught something in your class and you felt like you really taught that thing, like you were standing on business. Then when it was time for you to assess students, it was like you was absent that day. Were you even in the room because the students didn't do well at all? Okay? This is the cause for that. The students have not transitioned from those phases of learning, right? Because oftentimes we'll hear students say things like, Miss, what I saw on the test didn't match anything that we saw in class. That's because they haven't had a chance to generalize those relationships, generalize those patterns so that they can then apply them and make sense of new situations, new context, new numbers. They have not reached that level yet. And that's the reason why they are asking those questions, while we're seeing the performance be a lot less than what we anticipated being, right? They aren't transitioning. Okay. So recently I saw a post on Facebook where a designer for a math program, he made a sharp point about the CRA model or the CPA model or the CSA model. So what does that mean? Some people may refer to it as concrete, representational, and abstract. Some may say concrete, pictorial, abstract, and then some may say concrete, semi-concrete, abstract. Okay. So he argued that the real flaw in this model, okay, he wasn't completely against the model, but he felt like the model had flaws because students are often getting stuck in the first two phases. Okay, because we tend to overemphasize manipulatives and having multiple strategies. And I'm gonna be honest with you, to some degree, I agree with him. I can't say I agree 100% because I'm a strategies girly. But I think the reason why I can thrive with the multiple strategies is because I was able to master at least one of them. So then from that point, I could then make connections to all the other ones. So again, yes, I agree with him just a little bit. Students can absolutely get stuck in those first two phases, but I think I want to push his thoughts even a little further. Okay. And I want to say that the deeper issue is that many students remain at the surface level of learning altogether. Okay. So they're not moving forward to abstraction, to reasoning, to independence, right? They are becoming overly reliant on models, on these multiple strategies. Maybe they're even becoming overly reliant on us as the teacher. They're waiting for us to save them. And unfortunately, when we put them in a testing environment, we can't save them, right? So that might be why, another reason why they aren't able to perform in the same way, because they don't have us there to scaffold. They don't have us there to ask them those questions to push them along, right? So now I get it. Sometimes students aren't able to maybe transition through all of these phases because it's a pacing issue. We're thinking about the time. I know whenever I talk to teachers, timing is something that always comes up. But I want you guys to think about something else that could be impacting the students' performance, and that's week planning. Week planning. Okay? Because sometimes we think that things are going to go better than what they are. We think that things are easier than what they are. We think that things are more accessible than what they are. Sometimes we think that we know more as the teacher than we actually know. Okay. And this is what some psychologists refer to as the optimistic bias. Okay. We tend to have these blinders on, and those blinders keep us from doing that additional work in the beginning to prepare ourselves for that lesson that could truly push those students towards the deep learning and the transfer learning. I have conversations all the time with teachers about planning, and I don't know what it is about planning that we are just so opposed to. But I think one of the things that I think is happening is all of us have a different idea of what planning entails. Okay. Some of us think that planning is filling out a document that we're going to submit to our administration. Okay. Other Others of us believe that planning is looking at the resource and saying, okay, all right, so today I'm teaching solving equations. Got it. I know how to do that. Boom, boom, boom. I'm ready to go. Some people see planning like that. Whereas others of us see planning as, okay, let me sit down and I need to do this math. I need to make sense of the connections between the activities within this lesson. I need to be able to map it back to the objective for the day. I need to think about what questions am I asking? How am I engaging students in discussion as we progress through this lesson? How am I going to wrap it up? What is the consolidation or the synthesis that I'm going to facilitate to make sure that the students reach the goal? Okay. So again, there's a lot of different ways that we are viewing planning. And I think that is where the challenge is. And maybe that's why people are so opposed to planning, is because their idea of planning is really not on the up and up. Okay. So today I want to connect the idea from that previous episode to some very practical strategies that you can use in your classrooms right away. Because again, we're thinking about students transitioning from surface level to deep to transfer learning. So, how can we make sure that this is happening? What is a very practical thing that we can do in our classroom to ensure that this is taking place? Okay. So, in preparing for not only this episode, but facilitating this topic at the Hive conference this year, and then facilitating again at my district's new teacher PD, I started digging back into John Hattie's visible learning work. Okay, specifically the visible learning plus, where they talked about those 252 influences ranking. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't you worry, because in the show notes I'm going to add a link. Okay, so let me remind you that when we think about John Hattie's work, he was looking at the influences and their impact on student achievement. And what he did in working with all of these analysis and meta-analysis and things of that nature is he developed that barometer of influence. And so he said that there is a hinge point, okay? There is a hinge point, and things that are at 40 hundredths or 4/10 or zero point 0.4, however your mind processes that number, things that are at that level and greater, have a acceleration effect on student achievement. That's the line where the strategies start to have a significant impact on student achievement. So some of the items, the influences that were on that list, I want to pull out and focus on today. Okay. So one of them is study skills. Study skills has a 46 hundredths effect size. Okay. I'm going to also read that as you may read it if you were looking at a paper with this number on it. Okay. 0.46, 46 hundredths effect size. So already that is greater than 40 hundredths. So we know that it is beyond that hinge point, which means what? It's going to have a significant impact on student achievement. That's number one, study skills. Number two, note taking. Note taking has an effect size of 50 hundredths, 5 tenths, or 0.50 okay? That is note taking. Next is underlining and highlighting. It has the same effect size as note taking, okay? 50 hundredths, 5 tenths, 0.50, okay? Record keeping has an effect size of 52 hundredths, okay? 0.520. And finally, the last one is summarization. Guess what effect size summarization has? 79 hundredths, 0.790. Again, our hinge point is 40 hundredths, 4 tenths, 0.4, okay? All of the items on the list, the influences that I just shared with you, are beyond that. Okay. So again, it means they have a significant impact on student achievement. In the middle school classrooms that I've had the pleasure of visiting, one thing that is pretty consistent, we assume that students know how to do more than what is age appropriate. Okay, what do I mean by that? We expect them to know how to take notes. We expect them to know what to write and when to write. Okay, we tell them things like, if I'm writing, you should be writing. Well, teachers, I want you to kind of think about that. Okay, I want you to think about this idea that we can multitask and it be fruitful. I want us to think about that. We can multitask and it be fruitful. Can you do it as an adult? Okay, so then now should a student be able to do it? Should they be writing while you're writing? Or should there be a time where we're giving them an opportunity to make notes or take notes? We'll get to that later. But again, we're expecting them to know how to do things. We expect them to know what to write. We expect them to know how to summarize their learning. We even expect them to know how and what to study. News flash friends. Most kids do not know. And it's not because they're incapable of learning. It's because we haven't taught them yet. We have not taught them. Never forget a situation with one of my son's AP teachers, advanced placement. We asked that teacher for resources on how to best take notes while reading pages upon pages of text every single night. The assumption seemed to be that because he was in AP, he should automatically know. But the reality was he was 14. He was a freshman. Okay? And even though he'd taken advanced ELA classes in middle school, those classes didn't teach strategies like Cornell notes, chunking, how to actively annotate complex text. And here's the kicker. When we asked for note-taking tools at the start of the year, the teacher's response was to assume that my son wasn't a strong reader. I don't understand why we feel like sometimes as educators that a student wanting strategies or needing strategies means there's a learning disability. Does it mean that? Is that what that means? I don't think that's what it means. That leap didn't make sense to me. For us to go from there to there, strategies to he can't read, that's a huge leap, okay? A huge leap. We weren't questioning my son's ability to read. We were just asking for strategies for something that he hadn't been taught how to do, okay? And that's the point. We have to train students. Because when we don't, we set them up with gaps and frustrations that could easily be avoided. Okay. Another example. Sometimes we think about how when we've taught a lesson and it did not hit, And now you're frustrated, the kids are frustrated, the kids are checked out. But I want us to think about how, if in our planning, we thought about, okay, students may have some issues with this here, with this particular concept, because the past has shown me that students tend to struggle whenever we start dividing fractions because of XYZ. Okay, so I don't know if these particular kids are going to struggle, but I'm going to prepare with that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and supplement. I'm going to begin my lesson with this activity to activate some prior knowledge, or to determine if this is going to be an issue for them, because I want to set them up for success. Okay, it's better to have something and not need it than to need it and now you got to start all the way over. You got to go all the way back because you didn't really begin with the challenges in mind. People say begin with the end in mind. We got to begin with the challenges in mind. If I know what the challenges could be, and I start and plan and execute with that in mind, I am being proactive versus reactive. Okay. So here's where anchor charts come back into play. They sit right at the intersection of all of the influences that I mentioned earlier. Okay. So I mentioned note taking, record keeping, study skills, underlining and highlighting, summarization. Okay. So again, anchor charts are right at the center of that. They give students a visual. They make learning accessible. It is an ever-present reminder of the skills and strategies that we want students to own. Anchor charts aren't just classroom decor. They aren't just posters on your wall so that your walls aren't bare. They are visible learning tools that help students organize, record, study, summarize, and come back to ideas over and over again. Okay. We know that repetition is key for students to commit things to long-term memory, right? We want things to go from that working memory up front to that long-term memory in the back. And unfortunately, us saying something one time is not sufficient for that to make the leap. Okay. So we want them to come back to these ideas over and over again. Okay. So in thinking about these anchor charts and facilitating professional learning around these anchor charts, I was reminded when I was lesson planning this past week that maybe I need to make an edit to my document. Me and one of my teacher friends, we got together and we were planning, and she was like, this would be a really good addition. So I updated the lesson planning document, and there's now a section for anchor chart planning, because if we don't plan for them, then they usually end up being an afterthought, or worse, just something that we copied off of Pinterest and really doesn't have any real ownership in our classroom, really doesn't mean anything to our students. And therefore, we probably won't refer to it. Students won't use it. And we'll just end up in this vicious cycle of figuring out, why isn't my teaching working? Why don't students remember anything? Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about what makes an anchor chart effective. Okay. So here are the features that I discussed with participants at the Hive session and the sessions that I facilitated in my district. They are built with students, not just for them. It's not something that you're just printing from offline. It is not something that you make on your own and you're just going to add it up there and put it up on the wall and expect for students to look around on the wall and say, hey, there's something I need. Maybe I should use it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I'm going to be honest with you. Even when we think about those invisible math posters that you have up on your wall, when you have those keyword posters on your wall, when you have all these things on your wall, but you never talk to your kids about them, I don't know why you think that that is useful, unless, again, that's just decor. You just don't want your walls to be blank. So I'm just going to put this up here. I don't really care if you use it or not. That's why I'm not referencing it. So I need y'all to think about that. Okay. So again, they're built with students, not just for them. It uses student-friendly language. Okay. So the one thing I want to add here is, yes, we use student-friendly language, but we always got to connect to the academic language. Okay. If a student shares a way that they think about something, the way that they make meaning to something, I'm going to connect what they share with me to that academic vocabulary, because I need them to see that they are one in the same. Okay. And then I'm going to add little Tommy's name right beside what he contributed to the conversation so he can feel good about himself. Okay. So again, anchor charts are built with students. It uses student-friendly language. It includes visuals, models, or examples. Okay. Now, I said our examples, but we really want to make sure that there are some visuals and some models up there. We really want to make sure that there is some progression too, really, y'all, because we just said we don't want students to get stuck in those first two phases. So how can we make connections between what they interacted with physically in that concrete phase to what they work with in that representational, pictorial, or semi-concrete phase to the abstract that we're trying to get them to? How can we build those connections using our anchor charts? We need to highlight the connections again, the steps to the concepts, the vocabulary to the visuals, and it needs to stay visible. We don't want to make the anchor chart today for this lesson and then coffee gets spilled on it, it gets balled up in the corner, it's over here in the back catching dust, students never see it again. It needs to stay visible and it needs to be referred to during instruction because we're training students to see this is a resource and I can use this resource. One of my teacher friends, the same teacher friend that I was planning with, she actually ended up doing a presentation on anchor charts as well from a very wide perspective, like just not for learning, but just, just making rules, routines, everything visible in your classroom using anchor charts. And she talked about how when she's creating anchor charts that are learning focused, she leaves them up even during assessments. So obviously not state-based assessments, not benchmarks or anything like that. But if there is a unit assessment, she leaves them up because she wants to train students to utilize their resources. And she's also leaving them up because students get used to it. They get so used to seeing something in a certain position in the classroom that even when it's taken down, they still can kind of visualize it there, right? So again, it stays visible and we refer to it during instruction. Another important piece about this is the anchor chart should evolve with the unit or with the student's thinking, okay? And here's another thing. A strong anchor chart is a thinking tool, not a checklist, okay? So students should be able to look at it and say, oh, yeah. That's how we did that. Okay, that makes sense. That's the piece that I'm missing. Or I can use that model again. Okay, got it. That's what we want to see happening for students. Okay, those anchor charts should be a trigger for the light bulb in their mind. Okay? Anchor charts are also flexible. They can do so much more than just capture learning for a single lesson. For example, we can use anchor charts to preview what's coming next, to make spiraling visible, to support students who need reminders without always having to reteach from the front. Now we're teaching little Tommy to be independent, right? Whenever we are working independently and I'm moving around that room and I'm supporting students and I'm offering them feedback, let's say little Tommy asked me a question about something. Instead of me jumping to answer that question, I may ask Tommy a question. Okay. I may turn Tommy's attention to the anchor chart that we created and ask Tommy, I want you to take another look at that anchor chart up there. And I want you to tell me, how can you use it to answer the question that you just posed to me? And I'm gonna sit there, I'm gonna give Tommy a minute to think about it. And then Tommy is going to his wheels are gonna get turning and he's going to come up with something. And then I may ask him a follow-up question to make sure that there's a connection there, to make sure that he can start on his own or move forward. And then once I see that Tommy's got it and is able to do that on his own, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to keep moving so I can provide more students with feedback and support. So this is capacity building for our students. And it saves my sanity as the teacher. Now, I also want to say this. Finding your anchor chart groove takes practice. Don't be afraid to try something new, y'all. Okay. So, anchor charts are not about being Pinterest perfect. I know social media has us thinking that everything has to be together, that everything has to be perfection, everything has to be giving. Okay. But, y'all, you got to give yourself some grace and give yourself some time. Anchor charts are about function over form, okay? They are about making progress in students' mind over visual perfection, okay? And sometimes that means the first version won't look exactly how you imagined it, and that's okay. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. But if you are like me, and you might be a little obsessive compulsive because sometimes I am that, a practical tip is you can sketch out parts of your anchor chart lightly in pencil before class. Then, as you're building it with your students, all you're having to do now is trace. You're tracing over those essential parts while still leaving space for student contributions. Think of it like framing the house, but letting students help decorate the inside. Okay. It also helps to go in with a very clear sense of the strategies or models that you want to highlight. It's important for you to know this going in. How are you going to connect back to the goal? Okay. For example, if you're teaching multiple strategies for solving equations, you need to know which strategies should be represented. Okay. So are we starting with the hanger diagram and then we're going to connect it to the equation that matches it? Like, what exactly are we going to do? What strategies do we want to see students using? Okay. Are they physically manipulating some things? Okay. So then I can highlight that. All right, Tommy's physically manipulated this. And this is what it looks like in a hanger diagram, or this is what it looks like in a tape diagram. So if I know I want that on my chart, I'm going to go ahead and sketch that out. I'm going to make sure I'm looking for the students who have used that strategy, because those are going to be the students who I'm going to be amplifying. Those are going to be the students who I'm going to be shouting out on the anchor chart. So you also in the process want to leave space open for student thinking. Okay. So, and I'm gonna be honest with you, adding students' names to the anchor chart, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that's where the real magic happens. Anchor charts can be tools for student voice. When a student shares a strategy or idea and it gets added to the chart, put their name next to it. That simple act does two powerful things. It honors their contribution and it builds ownership. Suddenly, the chart isn't just yours. It ain't just mine, the teachers, it's the classes. And that sense of belonging is what's going to fuel the learning that you're trying to build, that you want to take place. And if you're teaching multiple classes and the thought of creating 5, 4, however many different anchor charts makes you panic about paper or wall space, here's something to think about, because this question or this concern came up in my sessions. Dedicate a portion of your whiteboard as your anchor chart zone. Build the chart with your class in real time, because you want everybody to get that same sense of contribution, that same sense of voice. Then at the end of the day, transfer the combined strategies and highlights to a single chart on chart paper. That way, every class has ownership of the process and you still end up with one powerful chart that represents everyone's thinking. At the end of the day, y'all, anchor charts are about more than steps. It's about more than vocabulary. It's about more than strategies. Anchor charts are about creating a culture where students see their thinking being valued, where the learning is visible, where the classroom walls speak back to the students. It's going to take some trial and error to find your groove, and that's okay. Every chart you build is a chance to refine your practice and give students another entry point into the math. So don't get caught up in perfection. Please do not get caught up in perfection. Focus on the purpose. Because when your anchor charts evolve with your students, you're not just making charts, you're making learning happen. And you're also showing students how to organize their thinking. And that's what we know they need. Okay. That's what we said they need to be taught. When anchor charts are created with them, they see a live model of summarization, of note taking. Those experiences prime their brain and their thinking, preparing them to take ownership and eventually do these things independently, right? And that's what we want. So, y'all, I want to hear how you're using anchor charts in your classroom. I want to hear about it. So feel free to tag me on whatever platform that you're on. Well, not whatever platform, because I'm only on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Okay. But also feel free to send me a message. What anchor chart has been a game changer for your students? Okay. And don't forget to share this episode with a colleague who's ready to make thinking visible in their classroom. Okay. Remember our move, send a message, right? So I want you showing up and showing out in your classroom so you can let your neighbor see it, so you can let your team member see it, so you can let the teachers on your grade level see it. And eventually every teacher in your school building is going to be influenced by the awesomeness that you're showing up with every day. Until next time, I want you to keep moving, keep making math happen, and keep showing students that their thinking is worth seeing. See you soon.